Good morning and welcome to the policy sessions of the Board of County Commissioners for February 1st, 2023. Gary Schmidt, what's up?
Thank you, Chair Smith. You have two policy sessions today. The first is 2023 Regional Transportation Plan Process and Project List Development. Staff from Transportation and Development, Long Range Planning will present. Dan Johnson, the Director of Transportation and Development, Karen Bierig, Long Range Planning Manager. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. Chair Smith, Commissioners, as Gary listed with the title of the presentation, we are here to talk about the 2023 Regional Transportation Plan Call for Projects. I'm going to turn this over to Karen, who has extensive knowledge in this area, but one thing I want to make sure we're clear, this is not development. For those of you who aren't familiar with this is not a new list that's being created. It's basically refining a list that has been developed for some time, bringing our Clackamas County values and priorities to this discussion. There's a 2018 list that we're basically working off of that's being refined through this process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Karen to move forward with the discussion and presentation.
Thank you. Go ahead, Karen.
Great. Good morning, Commissioners. My name's Karen Bierig, and I am the Long Range Planning Manager here at Clackamas County. And so today, as Dan said, we're here to share information about the 2023 Regional Transportation Plan. So I'll refer to that as the RTP, but Regional Transportation Plan update, but specifically on what is called the call for projects. So the RTP is managed by Metro, and it is a regional plan that has both policies and projects in it that helps guide our investments across time. It is something that's updated every 5 years. And the piece that we're really, the focus right now is the project list. The project list is important within the RTP because in order for a project to receive federal funding, it needs to be on the regional transportation plan. So that's a key element. So overall, we're involved in this process, and as Dan said, we're starting with the 2018 RTP list. So I think I mentioned this, the RTP is updated every 5 years. So we looked back at the projects that were included as a part of the 2018 RTP list, and then specifically those that were what is called nominated by Clackamas County. And so that list of projects is within your packet today, and that's the starting place that we have. So kind of the different steps that are involved, because it's a multi-step process. And the first step, which we're involved in right now, is identifying and submitting projects to Metro so that they can then analyze those projects to understand how the entire system is functioning and how it relates to the policies of the RTP plan. And then we'll be able to get information in the upcoming months about that. And so there might be some refinements to the projects that are needed before they're ultimately adopted within the plan. And so, and I say that because we will be coming back to you in the May timeframe, because we're required to get, at that point in time, a letter of support from our board for the projects that are being submitted into the plan. So right now, we're submitting them. We're doing the kind of the technical piece of putting them in so that Metro can use them to model, but then the official ones that are submitted come out in May. So that's I feel like that was a little confusing, but you definitely can ask me questions. I think a couple of key elements to realize is that one, and Metro is required to to adopt a regional transportation plan so that federal funds can flow in general. You know, if they don't adopt this, the full RTP by December 6th, the federal money kind of stops flowing for transportation projects. So this is a requirement, a federal requirement with regards to the RTP in general. Another element is that there's no commitment of funding. that is held by this process. It is just an identification of how much we think is going to come in and then how much we anticipate these projects will cost. But at the time that projects are actually committed to funding, we then be able to refine the cost estimates and figure out exactly how the funding will happen. But none of this is an actual commitment of funding. Let's see, I think another important element is the fact that the project list is updated every 5 years. So, and then one other thing that I will note in this nice little process is that there is a coordinated list. So we work with our jurisdictions to have a coordinated list that we send to Metro for their analysis. And that is something that our C4 Metro subcommittee will be looking at in their February meeting. So they'll be able to see all of the projects that West Lynn is submitting and all of the projects that Gladstone might be submitting or in Clackamas County kind of as a totality. And our coordinating committee ends up endorsing that list as a whole that is then submitted into kind of the analysis process. So just the last few things I wanted to mention before I wrap up is just a couple of things that are our projects, about the projects that are on our list. And that list was submitted, is within your materials. But for the most part, they are active transportation projects. They are projects that come directly from our plans. So the projects are within our transportation system plan. They might also be within our safety plans or our management operation plans, but they come from our planning documents. And as some of you might be familiar with, our plan, our TSP is broken into tiers. It already provides us with a set of priorities. So for the most part, these are tier 1 projects. So we know these are high priority projects that are regionally significant, that are important, and that we anticipate or we would see appropriate for accessing regional funding. So that's how we came up with the list and what our projects end up looking like. And an example, I'll just wrap up with an example of a project that is on the 2018 list, and that is for to build a complete street, which is sidewalks and bike lanes along Courtney Avenue. And so that's a project between River Road and McLaughlin. That's a project that we had on the 2018 list. It's a project that we applied for regional flexible funds to be able to construct, and that funding was awarded because we were on the RTP. It had to be on the RTP in order to be awarded that funding, and it's a project we will then construct in the future years. So that's kind of an example of how that RTP works. So with that, I think I'm just going to wrap up there and see if you have any questions. We're also looking for input if you feel like there is something missing from the list. There'll also be opportunities for input at the different policy committees after the projects have had this analysis done to them. That sounds kind of weird. We're going to analyze, but they're going to use the projects to understand better how the policies are working. So.
Thank you, Karen, for that.
I also want to plant the seed with the board, just to make sure you understand, because we talk about these plans that have been developed, the TSP. We will be opening that document up and studying that here in the year to come, so the board will have more input in the development of that plan here at a future date, a new, fresh look.
So let me understand what this is. I see an entire list of projects.
Mm-hmm.
And are you telling me we're opening this up for federal funding in urban areas only?
So that's a wonderful question, because the Regional Transportation Plan, Metro's Regional Transportation Plan, covers the area that's within the Portland Metropolitan MPA, the Metropolitan Planning Area. And that's just a planning area that extends a bit outside of the Portland UGB. So these projects are specifically within that Portland MPA area. There might be some, and I'll give you two examples of actually, here's one example of a project, which is the Stafford-Ellingson 65th intersection, which is outside of the UGB, but within the Portland MPA. So it is within this project list.
And of course, that's very much needed. I also noted two projects in Borland Road according to this list, is within the West Lynn city limits. Why wouldn't West Lynn submit that, and why is it on this particular list?
So I believe that the project may be from the West Lynn city limits to Stafford Road along Borland. It's not the portion that's within the city of West Lynn. So it is the portion that's in unincorporated Clackamas County. But similarly, that's within this Portland metropolitan planning area. While it's not in the UGB, it's within the planning area.
So regarding South Clackamas County, obviously, the south part is not in this, but I noticed there was a project that was identified on Beaver Creek Road and Redland Road. That must be inside the Portland, but now will Oregon City be submitting a list of projects? Okay.
Yes.
And there are significant issues there too, because traffic is so bad. So I just want to say, we have all these projects listed for federal funding. To me, it seems it's the same projects that the state funding, we allocate for state funding, and our local county vehicle registration fee gets a lot of this same attention. I don't feel that any of these transportation projects that have been voted on the last 2 years are equitable to the South County area, where more and more people are moving to South County. I drive Beaver Creek Road every day, and I never used to because it's too windy and I don't like traveling at dark if it's icy. I used to travel Highway 213. I realize we're not talking about state highway projects. State highway from Oregon City to Molalla is bumper to bumper all hours of the day. Why is that? Because the city of Molalla is the fifth fastest growing city in the entire state of Oregon. Estacada is on the list. Canby is on the list. And I'm not talking just this RTP. We as a body needs to start looking at spreading out some of our monies that we get from the state, the vehicle registration fee from the state and local, and not keep redoing, because every time I see a transportation project and we go through the list ad nauseum on consent agenda, that this project is here. And how many times do I read Concord? How many times do I read Linwood? It's the same. Oh, we get a $20,000 grant here. We need to start looking outside, because people are moving to Clackamas County, as you know. Our population has increased, and they're moving outside of the urban areas into what we call the country, which is Molalla, Colton, Estacada, up to Sandy, and all that vast area between Molalla and Canby. We really need to start looking at that. Now, getting back to the two projects on Redland Road and Beaver Creek Road. In all honesty, what's the real possibility of those getting funded? Because those are badly needed and they have not had funding before. I don't believe so.
So by just being on this list doesn't mean that they have been selected for funding. So in order for them to be funded, to be constructed, there needs to be a funding source available that would be appropriate and match that particular project. So for example, and what I often use is the regional flexible funds pot of money. That is what we look to locally and what is managed by Metro to be able to do investments within our transportation system. Basically, the regional flexible funds money is federal money that goes through the Portland metropolitan area to invest in transportation projects. So there would need to be an application into a program like that to be able to see an investment such as along
So
Beaver
how do you
Creek Road.
get an application into that? So this is what I think. I'm really negative about this whole process that we're here today. Commissioners sit here and say we need this and this. Problem, it goes up to the next level, okay, of which we don't have control. And the people at the next level are going to say, we want this in the urban area because there's more representation in the urban area. And yet again, projects like Redland Road and Beaver Creek Road fall off the list. Oregon City's projects are going to fall off the list because they're not considered to be, they're not in the urban area and there's less representation. And that's my bite. I don't like it. Thank you very much. Commissioners, up next, we have Paul.
Yeah, well, it is there's a lot of frustrating things about our transportation planning, from my opinion, where I stand, and also the funding that goes along with it. Our staff are doing, the best they can under the circumstances. So, as Karen said, this is restricted to the boundaries of the MPA, and Chair, there's a number of rural areas that are outside the MPA, which I have severe concerns about. Most of which aren't even on here because they're not within the boundaries, right? They're outside those boundaries.
I understand that, and I tried to make that point.
So Karen, what I want to get to, or staff, or Dan, what I want to get to is that I'm going to just digress slightly and just say my first transportation committee was in the 90s. My first transit TriMet committee was in the 90s. And here we are 20 some odd years later. And I see at the very, very bottom 3 transit projects, $25 million each. Clearly, there's no money for that, but there could be. But I'm struggling with where some of this derived from, and I want to use again, speaking to the committees I was first on, the McLaughlin BRT. I don't know where that came from. I heard of it. I know that TriMet wants it. They want to speed up bus service, but frankly, I drive it. I live there. I really don't see a problem that's anywhere near severe as the problem that the chair mentioned,
Right.
or out on Highway 212, okay, between 172nd and Foster, or from Foster all the way out to 282nd. They're far more severe.
Right.
So what this community has asked for over and over and over again is a shuttle, a local circulator. It's not on the plans. I see a non-capital, I'm sure it takes some capital, but the 172nd Transit Corridor for the same amount of money. But that area has asked for 2 things. Number one, prior to COVID, prior to COVID, a number of people said there's not enough parking at Park Avenue. I got to drive from Oatfield Road and Jennings because there's not a safe way to walk. There's not a circulator. I live in that area, or Webster and Jennings Avenue. I got to drive to the parking structure, but the parking structure's full. So the 2 projects that I thought would be here would be, number one, shuttle, and the parking structure. And this BRT, I know that some people think that would be a great thing, but that might maybe speed up efficiencies for TriMet, but the need, a practical, pragmatic solution that people are asking for to get to the current, because there's great service on 33 on McLaughlin, but they need the basic elements of getting to it.
Right. So I have a couple of responses. One is that TriMet itself as an organization is preparing a list of projects. Those 3 that were on this particular list that was in front of you were ones that had been nominated by Clackamas County in previous rounds. So in essence, there were holding spots to emphasize the importance of those areas. So that's one thing I would say. So with regards to the shuttles, as we know, there has been increased funding from the state through HB 2017, and there's a committee that works on that. And there is a pot of money within that that's called regional coordination that funds those shuttles. And so as a part of this RTP list, I believe that TriMet is going to have what we call a bucket, right? Like a placeholder for the regional coordination for all of the different shuttles that might be around the region. So that's one thing that we'll need to look at, and I think we have this opportunity coming up at the C4 Metro meeting where TriMet will be there, representatives from TriMet will be there, and they'll talk about the list. So secondly, for those projects that had been on the 2018 list, we have been working on making changes to those projects and making amendments from things that we've heard, things that we understand. And for that McLaughlin BRT project, what we're talking to TriMet about is the importance of being able to have, and these are all kind of like just different terminology, but it's called enhanced transit corridor, or it's basically, sometimes it's referred to as better bus, but ultimately it's frequent transit service with signal prioritization and better bus stops. right? It's making that corridor work really well, top-notch, great frequent transit, not necessarily, as you just said, we don't necessarily need to bump it up to bus rapid transit, but let's make sure that we, in the area, we here in Clackamas County are seeing investments that will help for more frequent transit. So bottom line, we're talking about revising that project description so that it better reflects our current needs. So did I answer all of your questions? Because I know that you had a variety of different things in there, but basically we're working with our partners to revise those projects. TriMet will also have its own list that will have buckets for both regional coordination, which are shuttles, and transit service in general.
Yeah, I just see a boulevard that is working relatively well. Okay, but that the locals in that area that would be served by that aren't going to be served by this project very, very well. Whereas what they've asked for is X. So it just seems that it's more of a pass-through environment that helps TriMet, and yet what we want isn't there. And if we're going to put it in there, it belongs here. I'd rather strike it and put shuttles there. And Chair, we somehow, somewhere in these plans, I think we need to be more deliberate. TriMet, I know they're going to make a presentation, but I've heard over 12 years now, oh, we ain't got the money, we don't have the money, there's no money, there's no money. They can find money for capital like light rail, but they can't find that. And often, BRT, you have a boulevard or a project starts out BRT, next thing you know, oh, it's smarter to do light rail, it's cheaper to do light rail, and it becomes a light rail project. And yet, the very basic needs aren't met. And everyone's clamoring in Clackamas County for the basics, and yet there's nothing basic in here. Possibly the 172nd might be basic. I've said a lot, but how much time do we have before we can revise this or submit it?
So I think there's a couple of different steps. One is we will be discussing this at the C4 Metro Subcommittee meeting. Staff does a technical submittal on February 17th. So we do the actual submittal of these projects on the 17th. And those are the projects then that Metro then analyzes and gets input on how well they're addressing the policies of the RTP. And so there's a window in there that if we feel like we need to articulate a change to that project, there's that window as well. But ultimately, we need to submit by May 24th a letter from the board supporting the projects that have been submitted.
Okay. Well, Chair, I'll talk with you offline. I got a couple things I'd like to share with you.
Yeah, would you please? The only problem with TriMet is people don't like to ride it because they don't feel safe. And TriMet's going to have to come a long way before I'm supporting any more money to TriMet when people just want some safe roads to drive on that aren't cluttered in the rural areas. We have 3 commissioners in the queue. Up next, Commissioner Schrader.
Yeah, I wanted to address the rural points that our chair has made, because I do agree with that. But aren't there acts that actually cover rural areas for accessing that same level of federal dollars?
Right. So there are the Area Commission on Transportation,
Right.
and we have the Region 1 Area Commission on Transportation. And that really is the tool for stakeholder input into the state system. What I would say is that projects outside of the Portland metropolitan planning area do not need to be on
An act?
the regional transportation plan to access federal funding in the same way. And there is not a regional plan for those areas outside of the Portland MPA. So this, in essence, the RTP is an additional step that projects within the Portland metropolitan area have to go through in order to have that federal funding. But the projects outside of the Portland MPA and in our rural areas are not required to be on a regional transportation plan.
Okay, so how do they access it then? I mean, that's
Kind of like a direct application, if that makes sense. And so if we are applying for funding for, let's see, like our federal lands access funding, that we might be investing in Barlow Trail Road. We can make that federal application for funding, and we don't need to say that it's on the regional transportation plan.
And this is a setup across the nation, am I correct? Isn't there a threshold whereby these MPOs become the conduit for the dollars?
Yes,
Yeah.
this is a federal designation and a federal,
Right.
a role that MPOs across the United States play, is to be able to manage these transportation
So
plans.
specifically for urban areas?
Yes.
Specifically?
Yes.
But for the rural areas, it's our job to apply directly for
Yeah,
federal
and
funding.
any of
then.
these projects that are on this list, we would have to apply for as well. So we're not, this is not an application for funding. It's just telling people, hey, we need these projects, and we have coordinated with our partners, and we have looked into the future and said, hey, we think we can have the money to build these projects. So there's this level of, hey, we have to do this within fiscal constraint. But it is really just a process more than an application. We are not assigning funding to these projects.
So, Paul, you've been involved in the act, correct? Because that's the area where the rural areas will help kind of do, they don't, in other words, they're not going to get the same conduit of funding as the MPOs as federally designated, but we become the venue, and it's really citizens on the act that help prioritize what they think need to happen. Because I remember the pushback we had to have in order to even get an act organized. Am I correct? I think you were.
Yeah, just real quickly, Chair, if it's
About
okay.
that, the
I'll
his-
just-
the
just
history of that,
almost
yeah.
just one minute response, and that is that was a means to address the rural areas, but what happened is the way the deck was stacked is that the urban areas get as much, if not more, of a bite than the rural areas. So it's like, it should be dedicated to rural, but it's not. And the power in this urban areas with Portland and so
Okay.
forth. So it's, the rural areas are still disadvantaged at the R1 Act.
So it hasn't been equitable
Right,
across
in my
the board.
opinion.
That's, okay, and that's what I wanted to
Exactly right.
to say, that there's a structure, but it's still not being run equitably in a way that our rural areas are getting what they need. Okay,
Thank you.
that's all I wanted to,
Have you
Justify.
finished, Commissioner Schrader?
yes.
Okay. Commissioner West, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. So, me being new, this week was the first time I've seen this chart. That goes back to 2016. It breaks down some dates. It says fiscally constrained with some dates, and then it says strategic. Can you kind of like give me a little direction on like what I'm looking at when these are kind of parsed out in these
Yes.
groups?
Yes. So as a part of this process, what we are required to do when we submit these projects is there are three kind of buckets. And one is called the near-term fiscally constrained bucket, which is in the near-term years. So for this round, the 2023 RTP, that will be projects that would be receiving funding between 2024 and 2030. And then the far out years, because this is a 20-year plan, would be from 2031 to 2045. And that's fiscally constrained. Because we go through a process kind of in the background of forecasting the revenues we would anticipate coming into the region, and then we identify projects that we would expect to be able to fund in that fiscal constraint. Now, there's the third list, which you identified, which is called strategic. And that is, hey, these are projects that are important, but they're above and beyond what we anticipate our fiscal constraint to be, what the revenue that we anticipate coming into the region. And so we have often, there's still a constraint on that, which is basically, if we doubled the money that we anticipated coming in, what are then the next set of projects? And so it helps us be able to understand what projects are out there. And really the subtle difference between being on the strategic list versus the fiscally constrained list. If you do end up getting funding for one of those projects on the strategic list, there needs to be an additional action by JPACT to bring it into that fiscally constrained list.
I'm also share the concerns of the rest of this board. I'm interested in how many of these projects end up in Washington and Multnomah County versus the projects that get approved in Clackamas County, and if that is an equitable portioned out equitably throughout the Tri-County area. It's already clear that rural Oregon and rural Clackamas County are often left behind to fend for themselves without these assets, but that's not what we're talking about. We are, but we're not. And I would be really interested to know about how many of our projects that are essential get funded versus those other counties. And am I correct in understanding, as I learn about this, that Metro plays a big role in the distribution of these funds, that they're the conduit from which it gets distributed? And so I'd be interested in seeing how Metro is handling this and where Clackamas County ranks in comparison.
Okay, so I'm going to just try to answer your question. So first of all, for the RTP, each jurisdiction provides their anticipated revenue forecast. So they work closely with us to anticipate. We look into the future and say, this is the amount of money that we would anticipate seeing in the future. So then we get to identify as many projects that fall within that fiscal constraint. So each jurisdiction kind of sets their own fiscal constraint within the guidelines that they've provided to us, if that makes sense. But each jurisdiction has different funding sources that may be available to them. So on the RTP, on the Regional Transportation Plan, in essence, it's balanced to the amount of revenue that's anticipated for each jurisdiction.
Okay.
Okay, and so where there ends up being concern is when the revenue is actually expended. So when we have these conversations about, and I keep using this, regional flexible funds, which is basically is a federal funding that goes through the region and saying, I'm going to match you to a project, and how those are then distributed and whether or not there's more going to one county than another. And so that really is where the money is spent. This is about what needs we might have in the future.
Dan?
I want to expand on that briefly because we're running out of time. We will get more information to you. I think there needs to be a discussion around the fact there is a regional imbalance around local funding, and that we can share that information with you and kind of get up to speed on that, which dictates some of this. But we hear your concern and we'll follow up. I just want to make a statement. Staff is actively looking for any revenue source that we can get to fund any project that's out there. This discussion is basically just making sure that projects that we're at least able to qualify, able to apply for them because of these restrictions that we play within. I would love to have control, this board would love to have control around federal funding, whatever it might be, and showing and funding these dollars. We don't, and we're just trying to play by the rules to make sure that we are positioned in a way that allows us to, should a project come forward. There are other funding avenues that are out there. We're talking about earmarks, things like that with our PGA. It's a very broad discussion, but I just wanted to say that out loud. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, we could spend a couple hours on this topic. Let me see if we can clarify something. Sometime in April, I think you mentioned, we submit a list of priorities to Metro. Metro analyzes them along with the other counties in the big picture inside the Metro planning area. They come back to us with a cooked-down list of what they think they'll be able to fund, and then we have to go back and give them a letter of support on that list. Is that correct?
It is, let me give a little refinement.
And one more piece on there. And, okay, if we don't concur with the list that Metro comes back to us with, do we have an appeal process?
Right. So first of all, our submittal is happening on February 17th of the project, so that our initial submittal of these projects. And then the analysis will be done. What we anticipate and what happened in the last round were really changes to the project description. It wasn't removing of projects. It wasn't a whittling down of the list. It was more making sure that the project had elements such as safety elements and supporting the movement of pedestrians and bicycles or whatnot. But it was about the project descriptions itself, and it wasn't about kind of that fiscal constraint piece. But we will be able to respond to the projects and potentially amend the projects if, because we'll also be hearing, they'll do a public outreach. We'll hear input from people about them. And so there is this time, and it really is in that May timeframe, that we can make changes. And we anticipate they're mostly about the description of the project, not necessarily taking projects off a list or, there is the potential for adding projects if there was really a need that we missed out on.
Mark, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? In summation, Dan, Karen?
We appreciate the feedback. That was the purpose of this exercise, was to hear you out and hear your comments about the list. This is not the last time we'll talk about this, and we'll be updating. If you have specific questions, once you've had more time to digest the list, please don't hesitate to reach out, okay?
Yes, thank you very much. I think we all have opinions on this.
Yeah, I would possibly like to revisit the list between now and February 17th.
I would too. I would too. And, but it sounds like the list has been completed based on certain criteria.
Well, we're at the board's disposal to come back and talk about the list. If you have specific comments or questions about a project, please let us know, and we'll refine that and have a discussion, and then we can communicate with the board, and if you want us to come back, we're willing to come back, okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'm sorry, you want staff to come back before February 17th? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You have one date, and that's February 15th, because there's no meetings next week. We'll work it out offline. Okay? Very good. Thank you. Your next policy session is Project Turnkey, Preliminary Site Management and Program Design Plan. We have staff from Health, Housing, and Human Services to present. I do want to note there are several members of the public in the room. Thank you very much for being here. There is no public testimony today. So if members of the public, if you have feedback, you can share it with the board tomorrow at their business meeting at 10 a.m. in this room, or you can always email the board at bcc@clackamas.us. With that, Adam and Vahid Brown, you can bring up a third chair. Yes, that's fine. One moment, please.
Yeah, Tony has one for you. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
Adam, will you introduce everyone and go ahead, please?
Well, yes, thank you. Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. Thank you for having us here this morning. I'm Adam Brown. I'm the Deputy Director of Health, Housing, and Human Services. I use he, him pronouns. I'm here with Vahid Brown, our Housing Services Manager, and Chris Iosa, our Housing Services Project Manager. Vahid and I both have some prepared remarks. Chris is here to support us in answering questions, bringing a provider lens to the table, which is very valuable. So we'll go ahead and get started. We're here this morning with two primary objectives. Our first objective is seeking your approval of the preliminary site management and program design plan for the proposed county-owned motel-based transitional housing program at the Quality Inn. But as part of seeking that approval, through our presentation and discussion today, we also hope to reinforce confidence in our ability to deliver this critical resource to the community and to do it the Clackamas County way. And we have been. We've been operating a successful motel-based transitional housing program through leases at 2 sites since December of 2020. But we know there's a lot of apprehension out there. We know there are questions and concerns about the location, whether it's a good use of tax dollars, risk of impacts to the surrounding community, and how the county will manage this site and its programming. But we also know that none of this is rooted in a lack of compassion for county residents that are struggling to find and maintain safe and stable housing. We've heard that loud and clear. So we're here to share our plan and address as many questions as we can. On December 8th, you approved a purchase and sale agreement for this property as part of the state's Project Turkey grant program. Since that time, staff have been carrying out due diligence on the property, continuing the county's extensive public engagement, and developing site management and program design plans. Today's policy session is focused on that last piece, site management, and program planning. We're going to share preliminary plans for how the property will be managed in terms of the physical asset itself, how we will keep the site safe and secure, and our plans for remaining engaged and responsive to the surrounding community. We're going to explain what we mean when we say this will be transitional housing, how our homeless neighbors will access this program, the supportive services that will be provided to program participants on their path to stability, and how those services will be delivered through community-based organizations. But before we get started on our plans, I want to ground us on where we're at in the process. Dating back to the state's launch of the $65 million Project Turnkey program in 2020, a program that makes one-time funding available to local jurisdictions and community-based organizations for capital acquisition and conversion of motels into short-term housing, Clackamas County has been actively evaluating and pursuing motel sites to acquire for nearly 2 years. In what has come to be known as Project Turnkey 1.0, that state-funded 19 shelters in 13 counties, leading to a 20% increase in the state supply of shelter beds, nearly 900 units. Despite a lot of hard work and a severe lack of shelter and transitional housing infrastructure here in our community, Clackamas County was not successful in securing a site during Turnkey 1.0. But building on the success of other counties around the state, Project Turnkey 2.0 was launched this past June, and the state made an additional $50 million available for this second chance. In September, following its submission of a funding application in July, Clackamas County was notified that its application was approved to move on to Phase 2 of the process. We are nearing the end of Phase 2, and outlining our site management and program plans are a critical piece of moving towards closing and securing this much-needed resource for our community. I'm going to share the details about site management, and Vahid is going to talk about program planning and design. So when we say site management, we're talking about 3 key things. We're talking about property management, safety and security, and responsiveness to the surrounding community. For property management, the county intends to contract with a community-based organization to carry out day-to-day site management, operations, maintenance, and security. The property manager will be responsible for all maintenance, repairs, materials and supplies, landscaping, housekeeping, cleaning, utilities, and ensuring that the overall condition of the property and its infrastructure are maintained and meet the standards of the county. The property manager will also, either directly or in partnership with other on-site providers, be responsible for registering guests, assigning rooms, and facilitating room turnover. The property manager will be required to maintain a site manual for program participants that outlines things like the program purpose, services offered, governance, participation guidelines, room inspections, policies, and site values in the Code of Conduct. We've attached an example of a site manual with today's policy session materials. With regard to site safety and security, we understand that this is one of the top concerns, and we share that concern. The county will work with the property manager to ensure that site safety and security, both for program participants and the surrounding community, are a top priority. The site is likely to be physically secured by a fence that includes a front gate to restrict access for who can come and go. Many sites that's limited to only program participants and staff. It will be well lit and have interior and exterior security cameras. Staff will be on site 24/7, and there will be an expectation of regular perimeter walks, both for cleaning and security. Additional security services or patrols will be considered based on needs identified by the county or our contracted service providers. Drugs and alcohol will not be allowed. Weapons will not be allowed. Camping outside of the building will not be allowed. Vahid will talk more about program access, but individuals seeking access to the program must be referred by the county's coordinated housing system. Walk-up services will not be offered. And in addition to site security carried out by the property manager, the county will hold regular safety meetings that include county staff, including those from Health, Housing, and Human Services divisions like Housing Services, Behavioral Health, Social Services, and health centers, but also law enforcement, homeless services system providers, and other stakeholders. This is a teamwork model that the county has experience with, and that has been very successful at other housing sites. With regard to being responsive to the community, we know that this program's success is tied to being self-aware about our presence in the community, anticipating potential issues, and being responsive to community concerns. We are committed to developing a good neighbor agreement in partnership with our service providers and neighborhood stakeholders. That agreement will give us processes for initiating and maintaining open, transparent, and proactive communication. It'll establish clear expectations and procedures for resolving problems. It'll enhance neighborhood safety and livability while providing access to these critical services. And it'll foster positive relationships between the site's neighbors and working together to meet our shared goals of vitality and prosperity for our community. And our program participants will be required to sign a good community partner agreement. An example of this is included in the materials for today. This agreement will include things like being respectful to others, treating the facility and neighborhood with respect, refraining from discriminatory language and behavior, and moving in a healthy direction through the program. All of this is critical to this site being seen as a resource for the whole community and contributing to our shared success. So with that, that's all of the remarks I have prepared about site management. Vahid is going to talk about program design and that plan, but I want to pause there and give an opportunity to talk about that sort of site management, security, physical asset management perspective if you have questions.
I think that we're going to have commissioners' comments pause until the presentation is over.
Okay.
So I would like
Great.
Vahid to talk about program management, please.
Perfect. Thanks, Chair.
Commissioners, write down your questions. I know we all have them. I've written down two myself. Go ahead, Vahid.
All right, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Vahid Brown, he, him pronouns, Housing Services Program Manager. I'm going to talk about the program design and plan. So first of all, with respect to service delivery, and Adam alluded to this, we would be contracting with one or more community-based organizations to provide the direct services, the supportive services to households being served in this program. One or more, meaning that if there is a lead agency that can provide both the program delivery of services and the property management functions that Adam outlined, then we would contract with one lead agency. But if there are population-specific needs that agency does not provide, then we would hold multiple contracts to ensure that we were able to provide a continuum of services to meet the needs of the whole household. In addition to the supportive services focused on transitioning participants into permanent housing, we will contract with one or more service providers who will deliver on-site clinical, behavioral, and physical health services to participants. And I've spoken to you in the past about the critical needs that we've seen surfacing in our transitional housing programming, and those really have to do with the physical and behavioral health needs of our participants. So we would seek to really enrich this programming with those on-site services to meet those needs in the program. This is a transitional housing program. So what does that mean? It's neither emergency shelter nor permanent housing. Emergency shelter is shorter term. It often lacks privacy, has a sort of a less deep layer of services. It's really meant to address someone is exposed to the cold in the moment. They're exposed to a danger while living outside right now. We need to give them a safe place to be, critically, quickly, as fast as possible. This is a longer term, more service-enriched and private setting where households will receive the support that they need to settle, to address the barriers that they have in their lives to acquiring permanent housing and being supported in making that transition into permanent housing. And that may take a little bit longer than an emergency shelter stay, which someone accesses just for safety. Transitional housing is intended for people who may benefit from some degree of structure, support, supervision, and skill building to move from homelessness into stable, permanent housing. So we're providing a bridge to people who need a safe, supportive place where they can overcome trauma, begin to address the issues that led to their homelessness in the first place, and the barriers to obtaining that housing and moving forward in their lives. So how will folks access the program? Adam mentioned that this is not a walk-up shelter. This is not a shelter. This is a transitional housing program that's being contemplated. So households will be served through our Coordinated Housing Access Program and through the weekly case conferencing process where households experiencing homelessness are prioritized based on vulnerability and need and matched to the appropriate programming. So the referral pathways will also include collaboration with our county's Behavioral Health Division to identify households experiencing homelessness with higher levels of behavioral health needs who would more successfully be able to engage with behavioral health services in a transitional housing setting. Once a referral is made, a community-based service provider would conduct an intake assessment. And there's an example of an assessment in the packet of materials that's provided for this policy session. If, in order to be admitted into the program, referred participants must be able to conduct activities of daily life unassisted and be competent to understand and agree to the program's rules and guidelines. Referred households that require a higher level of care that could be provided in this transitional housing program would be connected with other more appropriate placements, such as an adult foster care for households who are not able to undertake activities of daily life. So this is not being contemplated as an adult foster care. It's a transitional housing program. At intake, as Adam mentioned, households will sign a participation agreement that stipulates the program's rules and procedures with a clear understanding that the placement is for a transitional period prior to a more permanent housing destination. It's not a forever home. The supportive services, as I mentioned, the intention here is to invest in an enriched continuum of services to sort of treat the whole person, as I think I heard Commissioner West say in a conversation recently. That's the goal here. We would like to not just treat the unsheltered status of a household who's living outside or in a car, but also the wider array of barriers, complexities, health challenges that are maybe keeping them in that car and keeping them from moving on. So that's more than a roof, more than a door. It's also supportive services. So those are broad, and we have listed some of those that we would contract for here. I will just sort of read off some of these. Each household would develop an individualized service plan with intensive case management, so every household would have a one-on-one relationship with an on-site case manager. That plan would identify their barriers right at the beginning. Let's do a census of the things that this family or this household is experiencing. What are the challenges they face, and what is our, this week, this month plan to address those challenges and move you into permanent housing as soon as is reasonable. So I mentioned access to case management, intensive case management support. Could also include peer support specialists, people who bring to their work a lived experience of the challenges of the clients that they're serving. Housing navigation and placement services. So this is not an end point, right? This is a beginning point to a journey into permanent housing, and we would invest in those services on site to help people make that transition in the journey. So we're not having folks hang out, right? Folks are engaged. So that's housing navigation and placement services directly connected to the program. And as I mentioned, physical and behavioral health services, as well as access to resources, mainstream resources in the community, other support services, substance use treatment, counseling, financial education, Rent Well courses. Rent Well is a series of education courses the county provides that help folks prepare to become successful as renters in a market rate unit. Workshops, recovery support workshops, and other resources intended to increase self-sufficiency. So we would be holding community meetings and events, provide conflict resolution locally with the participants in the program, and of course, staff would be on site 24/7. In terms of population served, I included in the packet an analysis of our coordinated housing access wait list that was conducted this month, or actually now in last month. I want to say a caveat about that. That is those numbers are larger than you might have seen in our point-in-time count numbers, right? So it's the households that are listed in that wait list analysis include people that are not currently experiencing homelessness, right? So that's just a caveat. If someone is housed and is worried about making rent next month, or has received a notice, We often receive those calls, and they're entered into our system. They're not homeless today. They may never have become homeless, and they may have resolved their issue and not let us know. That happens frequently. So the Coordinated Housing Access List wait list is not a snapshot of how many people are experiencing homelessness, but it does, because it's so comprehensive, it gives us a good sense, data-wise, of what are the household makeups of the folks that are experiencing homelessness, what are the challenges they're facing. So given those caveats, there are fewer people experiencing literal homelessness in the community than the numbers on that wait list. That's my point. As you'll notice, the overwhelming majority of the folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Clackamas County are adult-only households. That's 81%. The next largest cohort are folks who are fleeing domestic or sexual violence, and then on down, families with children, unaccompanied youth, veterans, et cetera. Now, as I mentioned, the assessment and placement into this programming through our Coordinated Housing Access System and through case conferencing prioritizes households based on need, on vulnerability. We are serving the most vulnerable household first. That makes sense. It's how we're delivering our housing programs. And so we would anticipate that we would see a mix of household types like we are in our current shelter or motel-based transitional housing program. So primarily that program serves single adults, which makes sense. Most of the folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness are of that household type. But we also serve families with children, households fleeing domestic violence, veterans, and youth in our programming. Because at any given moment, in any given week, when we are meeting all of our community partners and doing that case conferencing, the household who's most vulnerable might be any of those. It might be a family with children. It might be a single adult. It might be someone fleeing domestic violence. So we would seek to, as I said, on-site, provide the continuum of services appropriate to meet the needs of all of those household types. I think that's the conclusion of my remarks on program design.
Thank you. For anybody listening online or the folks in the audience who seek more information, there's a very good 24-page report, and it's online under policy sessions with today's date, February 1st. And it outlines specifically what this is going to look like. Although this is not the final version of what we will be doing out there, but in this presentation today, we are trying to address a lot of the concerns of the community members who have voiced. We have a lot of emails. We also have a ton of support to go ahead and move this program forward. Just want to say that. I know my commissioners have some questions. I have a couple of questions I'm going to start out with. Commissioners, get in the queue. You say walk-ups are not admitted. Well, let's say there's some homeless folks, they see what's going on, or they heard about this program. They walk up. How do I get in? What do you do with them?
Yeah, great question. So we anticipate having, as Adam mentioned, a fence with controlled access. So there would be an opportunity there to post a placard or a card indicating how to access coordinated housing access. So if you're experiencing homelessness, call this number, we will connect with you. So we wouldn't, but the way that the program would be situated, you couldn't just walk up to the door of the hotel. There's a gate that will control access to.
What if they don't have a telephone? They're homeless. They may not have a cell phone.
That's right. They may not. And that's why we invest in community-based outreach and are now standing up the first ever street outreach program to connect with households who don't have a phone, who don't know that we exist, who don't know that there are services and programs, and meet them where they are. So, and we will have outreach in this community to identify people who may have heard of this program, may have known, oh, Tony got into this great program. I heard it's over here down on Sunnyside. And we will be looking for Tony's friend.
Okay, thank you. Again, I want to say we're getting emails about this is a homeless shelter. No, it's not a homeless shelter. It's a transitional housing where people come in, like you say, they are evaluated, determine why they are homeless, being put on a path. If they come in, they accept services that will be offered to them. And there is a good degree of success, but I'm not going to promise anybody that every single person that walks in this place is going to be 100% successful. That's not a fair representation of society in general. Not every person who has a home is 100% successful, and why on earth would you expect it for this population? Other counties have done this. There are 2 in Washington County. They're bidding to get a second one because it was so successful. Marion County has already 3 of them. Their Board of County Commissioners took the money and then just shipped it out to the nonprofits because there was a huge homeless population, as you know, in Salem. There are huge populations of homeless in Clackamas County, and on the very back page of the presentation today, it outlines cities in Oregon and their populations. I'm confused about one thing. You say Multnomah County, 12.6%. Is that the portion of Portland that's in Clackamas County address? That doesn't make sense to me.
Chair,
It's
you're
on the
referring
very
to
last page.
the
You
very
can-
last page.
Yeah.
So that's the percentage of people who have reached out to Coordinated Housing Access and said that the last place that they stayed was this location.
Oh, I see. And they have come into Clackamas County.
Or they may have called us from Multnomah County. A significant number of folks that we serve in our programs that serving people experiencing homelessness access services at the Clackamas Service Center, which is right on the border of Clackamas and Multnomah County. That's on 82nd Avenue. So I would assume that a large of those 175 people, I mean, we're serving more than 175 people on a regular basis at the service center, at the Clackamas Service Center. And many of them stay overnight, camp in Multnomah County.
Also, on the back 2 pages, there's some very interesting statistics with definitions that, we're always learning in this process. We have a definition of chronically homeless, literally homeless, non-chronic, and imminently homeless. And I know the governor has come out with, in her plan for rent assistance, some people who could be imminently homeless, but we can avert that through some rent assistance. With this situation coming up, I just want to let the folks know the governor has declared an emergency for homeless. And she has appointed herself the incident commander of Clackamas County's homeless program. And she has coupled us with Washington County and Clackamas County. And I've been in conversations with the governor saying, and she's doing it from a very almost military point of view, in that she has appointed a new state emergency management director who contacts our emergency management director. The only problem with that is Clackamas County emergencies have surrounded by wildfire, ice storms, the pandemic, we had a heat dome, and as I told the governor last Friday, with what your plans are, Clackamas County has had 4 now declared emergencies in 24 months. And our emergency management team does not know how to do homelessness or social services whatsoever. And we need to have our most qualified people, which some of you are in the room today, at the table, Governor. What you have planned is not going to work. And she said, Chair Smith, bring the people to the table whom you want. Now, Governor, I says, okay, fine. Governor, if you want this to be successful, then you really need to work with the people who do this and have plans for this. Now, Clackamas County has some money. We have many millions of dollars sitting in the bank ready to be spent. And that money has been collected by Clackamas County citizens in the form of income tax and some property taxes. And like I told the governor, the money that's collected in Clackamas County will stay in Clackamas County, because those of us in the biz pretty much fear that she's going to come in and take the money and ship it to Portland. And that's a very real possibility because of what I listened to last Friday in my second conversation with her. Anybody who does not know about that can read the governor's emergency declarations that she has online. And I want to talk to you about some math that she used. She says, Chair Smith, Clackamas County is a continuum of care county, along with Washington County and Multnomah County. And what that's going to mean for you, when I declare this emergency, it'll qualify you. You can go apply for more federal money through the continuum of care. But your number has to be above a 50% increase in homelessness since the year 2017. Said interesting. So I got off the phone. My chief of staff says, Tootie, there's no way we're above 50%. In fact, we're below 50% in the numbers. And matter of fact, people, we have been working on homeless for a while now, and the homeless numbers had been decreasing in Clackamas County. But when, folks, you all do the math, but when the governor put Clackamas County with the 2 northern counties, guess what? Our numbers are above 50%. Do you understand what's going on here? Please take that into consideration. Now, we can do it the Clackamas way. We can move ahead with this program and others like it that this board has designated, or we can just let the governor take over. And at least, folks, you have access to your local government. You're not going to have access to the governor. That's where we're faced. It's not a perfect situation at all. But I do have great empathy for people who have lost their jobs, who have come through, unfortunately, a route of addiction or mental illness. I would be really remiss to say that it exists in my own family and my husband's family, and we have dealt with this for many years. I have personally dealt with this when I owned a hotel in Molalla for 14 years. I took, and this is what my board does not know, I took in homeless people. I took in women who are fleeing sexual and domestic violence. I've had men come in who were unemployed and lie about their situation, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I took in those people, and I did not make a cent. In fact, it ended up costing me, but I learned a lot back then. I learned a lot, and I saw some of the lowest of the low. I'd come to work in the morning in the back of my parking lot. There'd be people sleeping on my back porch, huddled up in sleeping bags. And I'd go walk into the grove of trees in the back, and there'd be piles of clothes in a sack, because I knew they were going to come back for them. So we must deal with this program. We must deal with the homeless situation and get these people into programs and on a road to success, and it is expected that they will perform. But a lot of times you just need a hand up to show them how to get back on track. We have a lot of commissioners in. Commissioner Scholl, I believe you were up first.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the briefing this morning. We have compassion for those who are suffering from homelessness. We also have responsibility to consider the businesses, property owners who have invested millions in the area. Now, in your worksheet, it says, this plan is preliminary because of many details cannot be finalized until the county takes possession of the property, identifies community-based organizations to deliver services, and works in collaboration with those providers to develop the programmatic framework. Okay? Now, this plan in this location would require a professional nonprofit to manage it in absolute discipline, according to what you have here. And if that is not identified at this time, how can we proceed with absolute assurance that it would be a drug-free, orderly site operated in accordance with your management plan? And next, is there a management organization out there that has the level of discipline to ensure your plan is enforced every day? Okay? And the other part of that is, you know, we can't have any surprises, because going into this, purchasing the hotel, and then kind of working out the details could present some surprises, some management problems, okay? And the other thing, too, is, you know, the cost of insurance of the building, insurance liability, insurance of the operation, cost of energy, water, electricity. We haven't seen that in there. We have seen some estimates that you have on the cost of operation, up to about $1.25 million for property management and up to about $3.5 million for program delivery. So this could get very expensive, and if we add in the $15 million over a period of time, you know, that gets significant per room, per year. Okay? So again, my concern here is we've heard commitment, desire to alleviate suffering, but yet we have some unknowns here that could present some problems in the future. Something to think about. Thank you.
Do you care to answer any of that?
Yeah, so Commissioner, when we say preliminary, I think in many ways our program operations will be kind of a living document. That's part of what I've tried to frame here, is that there's going to be an ongoing effort to ensure that the way we deliver these programs and services meet the needs of our community, our whole community, not just those who are facing housing insecurity, but residents of the adjacent community, residents of Happy Valley, the rest of our county, the adjacent businesses. So this is preliminary because our job today is to provide you a framework for what we intend to do. Once we work towards approving this plan, close on the property, there's a whole lot of work to be done to actually put this thing into use. That's one of the things that keeps me up at night is we got a lot of really hard work. Let's start engaging with our community-based organizations. This here is effectively a scope of services that is the preceding element of a contract that we manage against, right? I've summarized some of those things here. This will be memorialized in a contract, but to your question about sort of enforcement of that, right, or accountability for that, that's part of the performance management of the contract, right? So that'll be outlined there. And then with regard to cost, the ranges that we've tried to provide, with regard to property management, the utilities, water, all of that, that's intended to be included in that range for property management, right? But we need to get in, we need to decide with, depending on the community-based organizations that step up on this, what are the roles and responsibilities, right? And so we don't have all of the answers today. That's part of this contracting process, establishing those roles and responsibilities. And you asked, do organizations exist that can do this? Absolutely. We have a whole pool of qualified vendors that are able to deliver these services. We're really, really eager to engage in more in-depth conversations. We've had sort of preliminary conversations. A lot of our partners know that the county's trying to pursue this. They're excited about it. They're sort of in our corner in terms of wanting us to capitalize on this opportunity. And so that's part of this process here is, all right, now let's get on board and let's do the hard work of putting the site into use.
Commissioner Scholl?
Okay, well, again, the elimination of potential surprises is very important. When we buy, if we buy this hotel, man, the wheels are turning. We've committed to it. And any surprises that come up that are going to be difficult for us to maintain, we don't want those surprises.
Yeah, and I don't think our measure of success is whether or not we have surprises, because we will. And I think our measure of success is mitigating them and trying to anticipate as many as we can, and then being prepared to respond to them effectively when they do happen. So that means being prepared with, capital reserves for, asset preservation needs, capital improvement needs, having a strategic long-term plan for what it means to own an asset of this size, right? So there could be surprises. Maybe you're the HVAC, you have an issue with your water heaters, like all those things will happen. And it'll be a surprise when they do, in the sense that we won't know the moment it's going to happen, but we do know it's going to happen in the future. So our job is to be prepared for that.
Okay,
Thank you. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, well, thank you, Vahid, Adam, for your presentation. Chris, hello. Chris is with Do Good Multnomah. Could you introduce Chris for a moment?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I can introduce myself. Morning, Chair. Morning, Commissioners. So my name is Chris Ayos. I use he, him. And Commissioner Savas, you're correct. I founded Do Good Multnomah. I was the executive director of Do Good Multnomah until last October. I stepped aside. I have since founded another nonprofit that serves community-based organizations and developers to build affordable housing throughout the state. I have a little bit more time on my side, so I also, would like to project manage here in Clackamas County. Good morning.
Great. Thank you. When Chair Smith said, and I think even Adam did, the Clackamas way, I take that, my interpretation of that is that when we set about in 2016 to, budget some money to get the Veterans Village going, it was a pilot, it was a model in which we would really experience some of the surprises, not deliberately, but in the sense knowing that they would be there, that we could accommodate that and then demonstrate through all the models that we looked at that we wanted to employ here, knowing that this crisis was going to grow, which it has grown greater than I thought back in 2016, in light of maybe some of the ways in which in Multnomah County, for example, it doesn't look so well, doesn't work so well. And I think they're also learning as well. There's the magnitude of their problem is substantially worse than ours. That's I think, quite obvious to a lot of us. So we model it. We've learned from that experience. And I look at the way we managed the facilities thus far is that the culture here in Clackamas County and our staff and the board, present and previous, has been to manage it in a way that there's no impacts to businesses and neighborhoods and so forth. And yeah, certainly there's going to be a blip here, there's going to be a blip there, you respond to it. So we know that that's just life. Not uncommon to any neighborhood, frankly, whether it's a low-income neighborhood or a high-income neighborhood. So I just want to just put that out there, and I'm also glad that, Chair Smith also spoke to, we're not building a homeless shelter. I think it was advertised that there was a homeless shelter to be built, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. We're not building anything. We are going to potentially purchase here a transitional shelter housing unit to shelter people, as staff has described. Over the years, I ran a brick and mortar operation on McLaughlin Boulevard for over 25 years. So I watched and knew a lot of businesses, some of which are still there today. And as years have gone by and the homeless problems got worse, we have heard from the businesses, even at our budget meeting, even at other meetings, we've heard businesses saying, how we have people sleeping on our door, we have people here, so forth. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And it's not tied to any facility we're operating or not operating. It's all over. City councilors saying, what are we going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? So this is one more project, one more site, again, if we go forward, in which we will actually address the call for that need, for that service. So this should enhance, really, in my opinion, it's a means to address the concerns of businesses, not create new ones, frankly. And I really am impressed with, frankly, the packet, the model, the framework that you all put together, and we'll refine it if we need to over time. But I think it addresses a number of my concerns. Something I did want to just talk about here today is just briefly, just to say it, is to make sure that we provide transportation for the folks that when they need to go to an appointment, that they have the means to get there and get there safely and get there on time. One thing that's also people are not really aware that if you are homeless, number one, you may or may not have a phone. You obviously don't have a mailing address often. You don't have a means in which, if for an appointment or for help, that you have you're findable. You can be findable about. So the Veterans Village model, not that it was just solely about veterans, but it provided the mailing address. It provided access. They're going to be here. This is where they live. We can find them, and we can get them the services they need. Very fundamental, but I think a lot of the public doesn't realize that, these people sometimes can't get the help they need if they can't have the contact or be contacted. So I think that's essential to put that out there. The safety issue is huge because it's not just the safety for the public or the properties, businesses, housing nearby. It's also the safety for the residents themselves, first and foremost, right? We can't have a mother and a child be at risk because of a tenant in there. So safety and the cameras that we've talked about and having all that, that's going to address that. And having the 24/7 on site, that gets that. And we'll do the best we can. I know we will, and if we need to step it up, we've got the resources to do it. It's not property tax dollars, it's not general fund dollars. The resources are very deliberately targeted for this population, for this purpose. So I'm not worried about the financial aspect at this point today. And in the years to come, I'm maybe thinking about if the problem grows and it worsens, what it looks like maybe in 5 or 6 years from now. And lastly, the safety for the staff that are working there. It's incumbent naturally for you all to make sure that all the staff, their safety, that the safety issues addressed. So you can't hire people and have good people if they don't feel safe in their environment. So, you are self-motivated, whoever the CBO is, the building, the community organization that's going to run this, they're going to be self-motivated to make sure it's safe. And we're going to be all over it. And if it's not operated right, you'll be hearing from us. I know that. And you've heard us say that. We're going to be all over you. So, but I'm not worried about that because we're managing models like this right now, and we're doing a pretty good job, frankly. We're not really having the issues I think that I'm hearing that some of the businesses speculate they will see. They're just not materializing. Sure, a case here and there, but for the most part, just want to thank you for the presentation. And this is a terribly challenging situation that we've got. It's a crisis, and I think it's rightfully so that the governor declared it an emergency. I just hope it's not an emergency for her full 4-year term.
Yeah, me too. It's due to expire in December, but we know how that goes. I have two other commissioners in the queue, I just want to acknowledge some folks in the room. I don't know all your names. I know there's a major developer in that room, a builder. We have a representative from the Veterans Board, and we have an assistant district attorney here, Bill Stewart. We have Rod Cook, the head of H3S, Mary Rumbaugh, our mental health housing person. And if I missed some of you, I apologize. We have our new economic director, economic manager in the room, who this directly affects economic development in the county, who's going to come in if we have homeless all over. So we have some real stakeholders in the room, and many people are watching online. Commissioner West, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. I want to just thank Clackamas County for being mindful and everybody wanting to solve the chronic problem. All too often in government, we tell you to trust us, we can fix it, and sometimes it's government that created the problem. We have only often been able to see this issue through the lens of what Portland has produced in Multnomah County, chronically throughout the state, up and down West Coast cities like San Francisco, LA, Seattle, Portland. We make national news on this issue. And so it's rightly so that a lot of people honestly don't trust us. We ask them to trust us, but we sure haven't given them a reason to trust us. But we all realize that this is a massive chronic issue that impacts every business, every family, every kid going to school, property owners, all up and down the lifespan and the economic scale. And, frankly, I think all of us here are sick and tired of seeing America chronically devastated by watching our neighbors live on the street. All of you guys probably already know, much of my way that I look at how to solve problems in my life is informed by me being a nurse. Not just me, but everybody in this room probably believes, like you've heard me say this before, that we're called to care for people. But as an elected official, I'm also called to look at things critically, hear every input, be judicious, fair, and make the best decisions for all the stakeholders as a whole. And sometimes decisions like this are not easy. Sometimes they keep us up at night, but that's the job we have to do to help fix the problem. With kind of framing it that way, I have a couple questions that maybe, as you guys know, is like when you pull a thread on one thing, it starts to unravel here. Or you have the butterfly effect, you do something here and it ripples out and impacts different communities. So when we are dealing with taking a well-working, well-run, nice hotel offline in the heart of Main Street in Clackamas County, one of the biggest business communities in the region, with lots of stakeholders feet away from this hotel. And I think some of this will come to you, Adam, and maybe in an email form too. I think some good questions to ask as we look at the systemic business effect on the region and how it impacts those stakeholders is, it'd be interesting to know what the gross receipts of the hotel was last year, because it pays a cat tax that impacts education, right? The lodging taxes for the year impacts our tourism. Those will be gone, those lodging taxes. What is the impact systemically with that question, right? What's the occupancy rate of the hotel and the hotels in the area? If we take 110 rooms offline and that's needed housing stock for travelers, what is that impact? Are we creating, what kind of vacuum are we creating there with the occupancy rate? And how many employees will be displaced? We're solving a homeless issue, but how many people are going to be displaced? I'm guessing the average wage at the Quality Inn is not providing maybe some people the same security that a lot of us in the room are afforded. So what are we doing? What's the effect with the employment of those people? I think are important questions. When we make policy decisions, we realize that there are risk, rewards, and everything that we're doing, and like making sure that that I'm digging in and doing every piece of due diligence I can as 20% of this board is important to me when I make a decision. I know you're going to ask us for, we're going to take a vote today. You're going to ask for a little bit of direction. I think the ask is reasonable, and I think the majority of this board is probably going to support you in that ask. Whether or not this passes the Quality Inn, finally, if the board gives the full approval and you get a majority vote, my promise to the staff and to every person here is that regardless of how that vote goes, if it passes, I will work tirelessly to make sure those promises are kept, regardless of how the vote goes. You may get a majority vote, you may not get a majority vote, but whatever that is I'm committed regardlessly to help make this a success if it passes. So those are some of my bigger kind of like systemic business economic questions around this issue as I continue to kind of dive in and figure out, what I think is best with the Quality Inn Turnkey project.
So you asked a lot of questions. I expect staff will try to do their best to answer them.
Thank you.
You bet. Commissioner Schrader, you're up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the staff. This is one of the best written documents I've seen in a long time in terms of how to manage intentional community. And yeah, I'm the government. Never thought I'd be the government in a way, but I trust you as our dedicated staff to make this work because it's heartfelt. I'm just going to remind people, Matthew 25:40. The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." It happens to be a value that I have. And I think that we have to continually be conscious of the poor and the destitute and those who are in pain on our streets. It just happens to be my ethos. The other ethos, and I've talked about this before, is Benedictine. And I've been affiliated with those folks for a very long time. And they take 3 vows. Basically, they take a vow of obedience, they take a vow of stability, and they take a vow of conversion of life. How you are constantly trying to prove yourself. But the one I want to concentrate on right now is that notion of stability. What this program will do will give people the stability and the space to heal to succeed, to have a place where they're not exhibiting behaviors because they're out trying to survive every day. They don't know where they're going to eat, they'll dumpster dive. We know all of those behaviors. Some people, have a mental illness problem. It's scary to see them, these people sometimes out of control on the streets. But I would say to the community here, this is not trying to impact a community negatively. It's bringing community together and building a stable, intentional community. So all those behaviors that we see that frighten people or they feel uncertain about can stop because they're not fighting for their survival every day. They have a place to sleep, they have food to eat, and they have dedicated people from the nonprofit, from the public sector, and I'm hopeful too from our business community, the private sector as well. I had a long conversation with my friend Mayor Ellis and David Amani. They did express their concerns about this. And I listened very closely. And what I will say to them is, let's give this a chance to succeed. I know it's different. I know it's unknown territory. But if we can work together as a civil society in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, we can help remediate this terrible, terrible crisis we have in homelessness. And I will remind people that our hospital system, I think that what is most remarkable for me, Kaiser Permanente, they have been nothing but supportive. And the reason the hospital systems are supportive is because they are having the crisis of homelessness in their hospital wards. They have people who are having mental health challenges, addiction issues, and they're put in these wards, and there's no place to get them moved to for stability. I've heard it from Kaiser, I've heard it from Legacy, I've heard it all from Providence, okay? So the fact that their systems are behind us as part of the nonprofit sector, I feel is extremely important. And I would ask the business community to please give us a chance to prove to you that as your partner, as a government partner, that we can do this right and we can do it well. So thank you for listening. I didn't mean to virtue signal so much, but however, if you all want to join me at Dandelion House with the Catholic Worker Movement to help feed some people anytime soon, let me know. I'll be making them homemade lasagna. So thank you.
Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, just real quickly, I know this is not the final plan. I know it's preliminary, certainly says that. Issues like transportation, some of the car parking, food, all those kinds. I know there's a more detail oriented. That's not what this purpose of this today is. So we can talk offline about that when we see a more detailed, plan. I did want to say something that's embedded in here that is a learned experience. I think it's worthy, and I'll make a motion after this. If everyone's ready, and that is that when I first visited the site in Eugene, it was a partnership with the city, the two cities in the county for that site. And when I met the operator of that, and also the people, they had a community organization within there that they knew that if this didn't work out well, they would lose their place, right? So it was in their vested interest to make sure that they were polite with the neighbors, they were cooperative, it was in their best interest, and you've got that I've read the packet, you've got that embedded in here, but I think it's worth putting out there that the pressure of knowing that if this is not successful, that their home goes away, this goes away, and I think that's a commitment that at least for being 20%, I like the 20%, Ben, for one of the 20%, I will not support an unsuccessful operation. I mean, we want to run a clean, successful operation like we have, and we currently are doing today. So, Chair?
Yes, I have one comment, and then I'll entertain your motion.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think when Martha quoted Matthew 25:40, I believe it was, what it says, we can respond to society's needs based out of fear and do nothing, or we can be courageous and accept the responsibility that has been dropped in our laps and try to solve the problem. That's the essence of Matthew 25:40. I want to thank you for bringing that forward. Commissioner Savas, I'll entertain your motion.
Sure. Chair, I move we approve the preliminary site management and program design plan as presented with future edits, modifications as needed.
As subject to the State of Oregon's Project Turnkey 2.0 grant program. I'll add that, Commissioner Savas.
Sure.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Savas has moved that we go ahead with the approval for preliminary site management and program design for the 110-room hotel currently in due diligence, but subject to a grant from the State of Oregon's Project Turnkey. Commissioner Schrader has seconded that motion. Any further discussions? Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, I'm concerned that this level of detail in this plan leaves too many unknowns. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be asked to vote on the purchase of the Quality Inn, and at that time, when we cast our vote, I'd like to have more assurance as to what we're getting into. Thank you.
Commissioner West?
If I am reading the tea leaves, I believe that there is majority support for the program on this board. Some of this, from this motion from Commissioner Savas, is the approval for its preliminary site management and program design for plan for operations, which hopefully will answer more additional questions that are not detailed currently. I think it's important to note that this is not an approval for the Quality Inn. But I think it does show that we're going to dive in a little further with the majority support from this board. So I think that it does give an opportunity to get more information and more information to the public and hopefully answer their questions. And that is how, I just want to make sure I'm expressing why I'm going to vote the way I'm going to vote.
Are you done?
I'm done.
Any further discussions on this?
I just want to mention one more thing, Chair. For people to really get the report on this, go to the Oregon Community Foundation site. They have a record of all the other places where this has been implemented, how it came about, and it will give people a complete picture of what we're actually doing here. So take a look at that report. It's very well done. They're one of our premier nonprofits that serve the entire state. That's all
Any
I have
other
to
for
say.
comments on this? Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner Scholl,
No.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much, staff. I think you've heard questions from this board. Take time to mull around with the folks in the audience, try to answer their questions. I know commissioners are available, and we'll continue in our dialogue and our outreach. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary, what's next?
That is it for today, Chair.
We are in adjournment.